So we are going to begin with the opening recitation. For those of you who know that recitation, please join. If you don't know, just listen, and that would be sufficient. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious Bodhi. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious Bodhi. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all knowingness. May they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious Bodhi. Thus, until I achieve Buddha, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind until death. I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind from now until this time tomorrow. I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, most excellent, I take refuge until Bodhi is reached by the merit of generosity and other perfections. May I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all wandering beings in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, most excellent. I take refuge until Bodhi is reached by the merit of generosity and other perfections. May I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all wandering beings in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, most excellent. I take refuge until Bodhi is reached by the merit of generosity and other perfections. May I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all wandering beings. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness, and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering, and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest rest in equanimity, free from the bias of attachment and aversion. May all other sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from the bias of attachment and aversion. So let's take a few moments to sit, and I will read some parts from the very end of the last chapter that I covered, the guided meditation that is provided in this book that we've been working with. Sit in an upright posture, lengthening your spine, making sure that you're seated in such a way that it's balanced, you're not putting pressure on one side or the other side of the body. So let your weight be equally distributed, stable, in a position that you are least likely to be fidgeting throughout, in a position that you are content to be in. And that might be sitting on the floor, it might be sitting on a chair. And if you're sitting on one of those pews here, maybe you find that you may need to provide some support to your back. In which case, maybe underneath the pew you can find a cushion that you can tuck in between your lower back, towards your lower back, and the support from the back of the pew. So sit in an upright posture, then bring awareness to the present moment experience of the body. So let your awareness pervade your body. Then ask yourself, how do I know I have a body? In other words, seek the direct experience of embodiment, paying attention to the pressures, energies, pulses, and vitality that signify awareness of the body. Then from that place of general but direct sensitivity to embodiment, look for more details. Push down a little through your tail and pelvic floor. Notice how that helps to shift the spinal column into a balance when the sacrum is straightened and the lumbar region of the back forms a springy arc. Now avoid locking or straining. Use a slight downward push to form the arch rather than force an exaggerated bow. So you may push your chest out slightly, pulling your two shoulders slightly backwards. But the key is not to cause any strain, but it's okay to give it some tension without straining. Then sustain this posture by lengthening your abdominal muscles so that the rib cage is supported. This way of sitting allows the body to be carried by a spring that transfers its weight down to what you're sitting on. And remember the original reason we are doing all of this, which is to have a good sense, a felt sense of having body. Then move your awareness gradually and sensitively up your spine from the tail tip through the sacrum and the lumbar, all the way up, widening your focus. Until you can feel the entire body, the entire torso going upwards. Scan the center of your back between the lower tips of the shoulder blades. Moving upwards, make sure that your shoulders are dropped and relaxed. Sweep a relaxing awareness from the base of your skull down to the sides of your neck and across the tops of your shoulders. Then now bringing awareness to your head. Slightly tuck your chin in and tilt it down just a little. Then notice the overall balance, that the head feels balanced on the spine directly above the pelvis. Check that the spine feels uncramped. Then again, relax your shoulders and let your chest just open out. Let your arms be long and relax into balance. Sense the spaciousness that is all around you. And in that way, stay spacious. And the mind is also spacious as it sweeps awareness throughout the body. Contrary to popular ideas about meditation, here we're not seeking to have the mind focus just on one thing and to discipline the mind to only focus on one thing. Here we are taking this multi-directional approach of checking in on the body, on various aspects of the body, on sensations that you can feel, and giving yourself time and permission to really pay attention to all these sensations. And all for the purpose of checking in with the fact of having a body, paying attention to embodiment. You may note some energies or inner sensations moving through your body, some of them agitated and some vibrant. Just note and then let them be. Do not react. Again, let awareness spread throughout the body with the goal of helping and the feeling of harmony and steadiness to arise. Let this intent for harmony and steadiness be felt as an energy spreading all over your body and even beyond. Then perhaps sometimes you turn attention to the experience of breath, breath being the essential property of body. Breathe in, feel the body being nourished, the mind becoming bright as you breathe in. Then as invigorating as breathing in is, and as clear as the mind gets when you're inhaling, finally you have to exhale. And as you exhale, just release and relax. Let body, let mind settle into their own places. And again, breathe in, nourishing body, brightening mind. And breathe out, relaxing body, easing the mind. And if you like that rhythm of focusing or paying attention to inhalation, what inhalation can do, and exhalation and what exhalation can do, if you like that rhythm, you can bring attention to that, anchor your attention on that. But again, don't forget that in this exercise, we want to develop a sensitivity towards body, bringing awareness to the fact of embodiment. After a while, you can even then shift to pay attention to how the body feels in the very last moment of exhalation, and how the body feels, or a specific part of the body feels, your lungs or your nostril, as the last bit of air leaves, as well as when the first bit enters and fills the body, fills your lungs. You can also pay attention to that, tune into that experience, check in with that experience. If you take some time to get familiar with this exercise, then the next part of this exercise is eventually the mind just wants to settle. You're not particularly looking to this part of the body or this part and how the breath is experienced by different parts of the body. The mind will just very naturally settle. Then just let it settle there. Don't meddle with it and just enjoy that. So anyway, good evening. Good to be back. Good to see all of you. And all of you on Zoom. Good to see all of you. Thank you for joining us. So the last 2 Thursdays I've been gone, and thank you to those who helped to anchor the last 2 meetings. I hope you all enjoyed those 2 as well, a different format. That format is more typically what happens here on Thursday nights, where we have the regular Open Sangha program. One difference from the last 2 weeks is instead of focusing on this book, this material, instead of having our discussions grounded in this book, it's on this classic called the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is a compilation, a compendium of very evocative things that the Buddha said to various people throughout his life. At some point, somebody kind of like collected these evocative quotes and put them into chapters in the Dhammapada. So more typically on Thursday nights, our group discussion is anchored on the Dhammapada. And our approach to the Dhammapada is not based on, now we are on page 43, next week we are on page 44. We basically just do sort of turn to whatever page you want and look into it and see what do we want to talk about. Okay? So that's our more typical Thursday nights program called Open Sangha. This particular series will go on for another 2 Thursdays, and then we will sort of complete the series. We probably won't complete the book. This is just my excuse to introduce this book to you and the value that I think this book has for you to understand this topic of karma, not just as theory, but how this topic of karma is really at the heart of what the Buddha taught. I don't know. Maybe it's just me and my academic baggage. I have a PhD in religious studies, focused on Buddhism. But there is sort of this trend, or at one point there was this trend. I don't know if this trend affects you guys, but in case it does, so maybe it's more my issue than any of yours. But there is like this trend to kind of dismiss these teachings on karma as something that is like Buddhism for dummies. That because the Buddha was born in ancient India and ancient Indians believed in karma, so the Buddha was also either variously said to be either also a product of his time and therefore never questioned these teachings on karma. That's one view that they put out there. Or that he just went along with it to make things easier. And that he didn't really mean to teach karma. That what he had to taught was something more special, more profound, more amazing than this karma stuff. Now, in part, these views are there because, to be fair, there are some rather, I would say, crude or coarse kind of ways of explaining karma, even within the Buddhist tradition. So I will freely admit to that. But if you only know those, right, and come to the conclusion that, oh, yeah, this karma thing, I like Buddhism, but this karma thing, I don't know, it's not really Buddhism, then you're really missing what is in fact the heart of what the Buddha taught. As I said at the beginning of the series, the word karma, yes, was used by Indians, ancient and present, widely used. But how they were used by different spiritual traditions in India, if you look at it, there is a big range. So certain parts of India during the Buddha's time, for example, not now scholars, at least some scholars, nature of scholars is they don't agree. That's the job description, right? Because how you get your PhD is you disagree with a bunch of people, and you prove that your disagreement is more disagreeable or less I don't know. Your disagreement has more value than their disagreement, right? So that's the nature of that job, right? So anyway, there are different kind of understandings of what karma. Different groups use the word karma differently. Its basic meaning is just action. Now, so back to those disagreeing scholars. The prevalent kind of view about the Buddha and his times is that everybody in the Buddha's time, in the Buddha's area, had the same concept of karma, which is karma as not all actions, but a particular kind of action, which is effective ritual action. Yeah, effective ritual action is called karma. So in that context, karma is good, because you want to perform effective ritual action. To do what? Well, most importantly, to maintain order in the universe. So that is the view presented by the sacred scriptures, sacred to Hindus to this day, called the Veda. So in the Vedas, when they say karma, especially the earliest layer of the Vedas, karma refers to effective ritual actions. Ritual actions that, when performed on a regular basis, will maintain order in the universe. And when there is order, then there is happiness, there is goodness, right? So that vision is a universe that actually is continuously being threatened by disorder. So human beings in particular have to perform these effective ritual action. Over time, within that tradition, an idea also developed that karma is not just effective ritual action, but also karma is playing your role in society depending on the station of life, the class of society that you were born into. So then there's that other layer of understanding what karma is. So then, by the time Siddhartha was born, and when Siddhartha, we say, became Buddha, he understood karma in a different way, in the way that we have been looking at karma. So there, one of his most important explanation of karma is he says, what is karma? Karma is refers to actions that are driven by intentions. And so yawning is not a karmic act. Sneezing is not a karmic act. Unless the intention to sneeze, or you actually induce a sneeze so that you will make someone sick, then that becomes karma. And in the terms that we've been talking about, dark karma, right? Negative karma. Because the intentions are heavy, dense, and sinking, so to say, instead of light and nourishing. So we say skillful, unskillful, and then sometimes bad or good. Right? So Buddha says, karma are actions of body, speech, and mind that are driven by intentions. Then we have been looking at, right, the various places that this basic concept turns up in the Buddha's teachings. The last time I was with you guys, we were looking at the karma of meditation. How this basic teaching of karma, how it actually informs what we call meditation in the Buddhist tradition. So what is meditation for? Meditation, in the context of karma, is the discipline, the art, you could even call that, and it's all of that, of how to reprogram the programs that we have programmed ourselves into. So right now, you have different coding, initiating different programs, right? And delivering different results. And most of these programs are productive of stress and suffering. Dis-ease, unease, dissatisfaction. And it keeps going again and again because it's become automatic. It has become like a circuit. All you need to do is flip the switch and it goes. So that programming can be undone, can be deprogrammed and reprogrammed. How do you do that? Through what we call meditation. So meditation begins by relaxing body and mind. Why do you do that? When you relax body and mind in a skillful way, then the mind has a good reason to not run all over the place, is happy and content to be here. So of course, relaxing body and mind, easing the strains of body and mind is necessary, but that is just the beginning. That is just the beginning. Now, that aspect of Buddhist meditation has been taken, right, into the secular context to help people. And that's very good. No complaints there. But you should know that is only a preliminary step. The bigger project, the more ambitious project that the Buddha proposes is possible, and you should try, is to undo all these programs that lead to stress and suffering, so that they are completely removed. So it's not, Buddhist practice is not just kind of trick yourself into bearing with suffering, but to actually become free from suffering. Now, what does that freedom look like? Of course, there are nuances to it. And maybe even right now, our crude ideas of freedom from suffering is not exactly the freedom that the Buddha is talking about. But the general contours of what that freedom looks like, in fact, we all know. And for fleeting moments, in fact, in our lives, we have tasted that. But it's fleeting. So now we want to find a way, a method of how to make it lasting, this end of suffering. And so Buddhist meditation then is intended to undo the programs, to recode these programs, so that happiness becomes automatic. But before it can become automatic, you have to rewrite your program. So that was the karma of meditation. Today, what we want to look at is what about residual karma, past karma? What should we do about it? Can we do anything about it? Meaning, actions taken yesterday, last week, last month, last year, and previous lifetimes, are we stuck with them? Are we stuck with those actions? And those actions and the results of those actions, are we doomed to have to endure and, without choice? No. In fact, there is one time, one of the Buddha's followers, disciples, was apparently teaching his students, teaching the newcomers to the Buddhist practice, a very strict, you could say, rigid teaching on karma. And he says, karma will never, not only karma will never be mistaken, but karma is always fixed. So karma is unmistaken, as in, A seed, whatever the seed that is planted, unmistakably, when it sprouts, it will be of the same. So you don't plant like rice and end up with quinoa. No, not possible. So yes, of course, Buddha agrees. Karma is unmistaken in that way. But is karma fixed? Meaning, once you have planted, a barley seed, it will for sure sprout. Barley sprouts. So this monk, this disciple apparently taught that. And the Buddha heard about it. The Buddha calls him and say, "Are you teaching people this?" And he said, "Yes. This is what I understand you to teach." The Buddha says, "No, I do not teach that. Because if that was the case, right, then he says it would render the spiritual life meaningless." Right? That means what you have done in the past, no matter how you live now, you cannot change. And then he says, if you cannot change, then action is rendered meaningless. So, of all wrong views, according to the Buddha, the most dangerous wrong view is, the most dangerous mistaken view is actions don't matter. And sometimes in our frustration, we might feel that way. Like, oh, in the big picture, whatever I do don't matter. And Buddha says, once we are stuck in that mode of thinking, then there is no possibility to be free from suffering and to achieve lasting happiness. So then the Buddha we come back to this monk. The Buddha says, don't say that, because it's not true. Your present actions can halt the sprouting of old seeds that have been planted. You can scorch it with fire of wisdom. You can burn those seeds with clear seeing, with clear understanding. Then they will never bear, they will never sprout, and they will never proliferate further. And so that's one example he gave. Another one then he says, even when, let's say, a past cause that was created, you were not able to scorch it, burn it with wisdom fire, and now it is sprouting. And he says, and then when that happens, do you surrender? Do you say, oh, too bad, it's here already, so here, just take me, right? He said, no. He says, even that is not yet fixed, this result. Why? Then here he gave this analogy. He said, now let's say, he says, I don't know, he picked up a mug or, and he said, and then he said, pretend there is a scoop of salt here. A big scoop of salt. Then he says, so what do you think? If I put it into this little mug here, can we drink this water? So the disciple said, oh no, it'll be too salty. Buddha says, yes, of course. Then he says, okay, now pretend the same scoop of salt, right? And now you have a reservoir. And I'm going to pour this scoop of salt into the reservoir. Can we drink the water of the reservoir? And the disciple said, yes, of course. The Buddha says, this cup here is an untrained mind, is an untrained heart. The reservoir is a trained mind, is a trained heart. The same scoop of suffering, that maybe doesn't change, right? Same amount of salt. It's the same scoop of suffering. But when that scoop of suffering goes into an untrained mind, that water is impossible to drink. It will be very painful to drink, will be very torturous to drink. But if that scoop of salt goes into a trained mind, a trained heart, then you can barely taste that scoop of salt. So he says, even when the seeds of your actions have started to ripen already, the fact that you have a trained mind makes all the difference. Now, of course, if you start training the mind when it has already turned up, that's a little bit hard. So better to train your mind, train your heart at all times, so that in case, right, these past negative seeds ripen, it will barely be noticed. So he gave, these examples, analogies to show, to demonstrate the point that old karma, you are not stuck with it. First, you can get rid of it before it even sprouts, much less bear fruit further. Secondly, even if when it has sprouted, when it bears fruit, you can still experience it differently. Okay? So that's kind of the main point. Now let's look at this book, the way that Ajahn Sucitto, the teacher who taught the content of this book, is basically his students collected all his various different talks that he gave over a period of time on this topic on karma, and then they turn it into this book. Okay, so at the beginning, I'm going to read a little bit from here. It says, "Do you ever remember things you wish you hadn't done?" Oh. Okay, don't worry, no confession booths here. First of all. Secondly, no power to, cleanse in any case. So we won't get into that. But just, right? Do you remember things you wish you had not done? Perhaps after making a cutting remark or catching yourself exaggerating in order to get your own way, you have the sinking realization, uh-oh, lost it again. Or do you get flooded with painful memories about what's been done to you? That too. Right? And then thinking when something negative has been done to you, and then you're going, oh, is this my bad karma? How do I become free of this? We all have had these kinds of experiences. Even just today, maybe. You have both. Especially the feeling that some wrong has been done to you, rather now or at some point in the past. Those memories, sometimes when they just turn up, they can totally change your whole day. They can totally, completely, consume you. So, what do we do, What do we do with that? At some time or another, all of us have said or done things that we look back on with regret. Or, including, we look back with regret of what we failed to do. That we thought, oh, we should have done this. I should have done this. But failed to do. Then again, those memories that, I've been wrong, I've been taken advantage of, I've been abused. All those things from the past, right? Sometimes when they come, they just kind of flood us, take over us. And so, coming back to the book, it says, if an event has emotionally moved us, then the heart impression is strong. And that impression arises again in the experience of involuntary memory. It is one feature of our inner world. You were talking to someone, then that conversation took a few turns, and suddenly you were back arguing with your father or feeling rejected by a loved one again. It's just, like you didn't even anticipate. Right? Now, all of these are the programming. So it's also not the case that this is all mysterious. In fact, we have fed, we have continuously reinforced this kind of programming. Right? The reliving of past events is the case even when we didn't do anything, but were the recipients of other people's bad or good actions. Why? Because the underlying program of the affective mind, or citta, remember citta? Citta is not just that aspect of the mind that is like receiving information, but citta is that aspect of the mind that we would say feels and responds, that is being affected. So this affective mind, citta, because the underlying program, program of this citta is to register contact with a feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Right? Because it has this program, right, to register contact, and based on that, not only does it register the contact and recognize it as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, it designates a heart impression. It labels it with like, don't like, or I don't really care. Then that begins to build up. This lingers as a perception. And now we go on to the next one. After it registered, after contact, after feelings of like, or don't care, neutral, then it lingers as a perception that can store the emotion in the way that a barcode stores images or instructions. Yeah. If you have gone downtown, at least at one point a few years ago, there are these QR code scans, like very mysterious, like a big one just there, right? And you're like, should I scan? Should I not scan? Of course, you know better than to scan. But I don't know about you, but at least me, it's like, I really want to scan and see what happens, right? And that's just how we are, I guess, But how we are, again, is not, some mysterious without rhyme or reason. We have assented to, we have reinforced that kind of programming. And so we're attracted to. Let's scan and see what happens, right? Now you know better than to do that, then you're like, hey, can I have your phone?
Once formed, these perceptual patterns generate programs that keep forming and informing different scenarios based on these themes. It is as if the actors and backdrops change, but their voices and atmospheres can keep resounding in our hearts. Recycled by patterns and programs, stories about alienation, unworthiness, or mistrust, and more become so familiar that they form part of our now heart territory. From very subtle heart impressions, they now become part of our heart territory. In fact, as unpleasant as it sounds, but because they have become familiar, we claim them as part of our heart territory. Feelings of mistrust, feelings of suspicion, feelings of regret and resentment. Now they have become part of our heart territory. They have become aspects of I. I'm like that. You don't like that? Don't hang out with me. Right? We're even kind of proud about that. You know. Yeah, I'm rude. Don't like that? Go somewhere else. You know. Like, you know. So proud of it. Now, the solution is not to become ashamed of it either. We'll see later. That's not the solution, right? Just because I make fun of and I guess I'm criticizing that's really silly, right? The solution is not to reject that, to hate that, right? Because you don't deprogram that program that way. The Buddha taught a different way. And Ajahn Sucitto will highlight that for us. So afflictive felt meanings such as these can take hold and establish personality patterns, such as being the victim or the one who gets left out, or the flawed, or the unloved, or the impure. So we begin to have this self-image of who we are, and we hold on tightly to it. And then we don't like that either. Then we hate ourselves. Then they lessen our self-respect and our confidence in doing things or in being with others. Once we are not comfortable in our own skin, it's very painful to be around others. What others say, what others don't say, what others do, what others don't do, they all become like weapons hurled at us, like sandpaper against, raw skin, raw flesh. What people do, what people don't do, what people say, what people don't say, they all just become unbearable. So the past that comes flooding back isn't really past. So here's the thing. The so-called past that come flooding back to us, it's not literally some ghost of Christmas past that has turned up. They are present formations. But present formations that we believe is the exact replaying of the hurt that happened 20 years ago, when it's not. First of all, objectively, it is not. Secondly, the vivid memory is often what? Exaggerated memory. Then more importantly, what is actually happening here? what is actually happening here is a present formation. We call sanskara or sankara in Pali. And so it is a present formation, rising up and recycling those perceptions and memories of the past. So in fact, your programming is creating suffering in the present. Is forming suffering in the present. Is fabricating suffering in the present. Even though we think, oh, it's a past memory that has come back. No, it's a present formation. And yet, but yet, there is a glimmer of hope in the fact that they are recycled. They are not permanent, and they are not I or myself. They are just temporary formations that are presently forming. The recycling of these hard impressions creates a sense of continuity, of history, and of being someone defined in that. And this is the program of becoming. We are constantly turning on that switch of becoming, which is the literal translation of the word bhava, which is often, I think, mistranslated as existence. Better maybe translated as neurotic existence. And sometimes even translated as life. As in, that painting that they call the Wheel of Life, where there's a big demon kind of clutching right onto this wheel of life, and they say, this is the wheel of life. Then other people say, oh, Buddhists have such a pessimistic view about life. Then also they say, Buddha says, life is suffering. Well, that's, bhava is dukkha. Life is suffering. But no, bhava is suffering. And what is bhava? Bhava is this kind of neurotic existence. This kind of becoming. The becoming that becomes by aggregating hard impressions that are in fact very light, very ephemeral, very temporary, like bubbles, but somehow we figured out a way to turn them into marbles when they are in fact bubbles. Nor is it true. All these hard impressions. Nothing changes so quickly as citta. This is because citta, rather than being some kind of soul or immaterial thing, is more like a vortex of sensitive intelligence. So it's not like citta itself is bad. In fact, it is a sensitive intelligence or an energetic field like that of a magnet, except that the field is dynamic. It's moving. It is sensitive and receptive. And the other side of this citta we call manas. That's the quality of this mind that brings perception, or as bodily sensations touch citta, shifts happen. So the citta trembles, he says. Disagreeable and agreeable impressions push and pull chitta. Thus, the chitta's trembling forms waves of resistance or excitement. But we are not at all in touch with the tremblings of our chitta. Instead, we quickly label as I am angry. I'm unsatisfied. I'm in love, even. When it's just tremblings of chitta. These get rigid or brisk under the pressure of some perceptions and feelings, or reach out when touched by others. Dependent on whether and how a perception has moved the chitta, we may cognize that a smile means friendly and that the smiling person is trustworthy. Pleasant feeling equals good. Then we recognize those signs when we come across them and others like them, even when the basis of the meaning is superficial. Signals are not reality and need to be checked out. We are prone to short-term attention, grabbing at feeling, and jumping to conclusions. We have a feeling, and then we make conclusions, and then we stick to it. Now, this is the crucial point. This is why chitta doesn't erase or stop recycling patterns, because the program reinforces itself. So by itself, left to its own devices, it will keep strengthening this delusion. Based upon this ignorance, the self-construction program kicks in. The pattern provides a stable reference point, so it becomes part of my world and my identity. Then he says, hence, toads disgust me. Or I vote for the liberal candidate. Or I must have peanut butter rolls and coffee to begin my day. Contact, heart impressions, then behavior pattern. And out of all that, a self is born. And that self creates karma. And that self owns karma. And that self becomes bound by the results of karma, the results of action. But that self is neither stable, nor reliable, nor factually real. Yeah, so this chapter, again, have a lot of very helpful insights. Yeah? As I say, we're not really doing a book club. I want to now skip to this part where he talks about clearing results from the past. How do you do that? Right? So we see how, right, these impressions, these perceptions, these identities, right, that occurred in the past, and due to these coming together of conditions, then we reform those things in the present, and then we let them reinforce the delusion of this is who I am, this is what I am, this is just how I am, and all of that. And to see how karma from the past becomes this force that shapes our present experience, then affects future selves. So now, clearing results from the past. So page 101, if you have the book. With regard to what we can do to clear our inner world, the process of clearing the past as outlined by the Buddha is twofold. It's very helpful. First, acknowledge. First, acknowledge. First, bring clarity to what is it that needs to be cleared. So we call this to admit. So in the Tibetan Buddhist context, we have these practices that are often translated as confession. But that translation is inadequate and maybe give the wrong impression, wrong understanding. So these practices are called Tongsha in the Tibetan tradition. Tongsha has two parts to it. The first part is Tong, is to expose, to bring into light, no longer hiding, no longer kind of shoved into the dark. So it's the same as what Ajahn Sucitto here is saying, to acknowledge. So he says, first, to acknowledge the results of action and to determine not to act in such ways again. So you have to see the cause and effect of both happiness and suffering. If you don't admit to that, this is how I have caused suffering to myself, to others. This is how I am, on the basis of fleeting things and feelings and sensations and memories, right? I'm now reforming, recreating suffering in the present. Until we see that, until we admit that, there's no way to become free from that. The second part in that Tibetan Tongsha, Shakpa, is, what is it? It's to lay aside, to put aside, to put down, to put aside, to say, I am done. I don't want this anymore. So can we put it aside? So first, don't turn away from unpleasant feelings. Don't turn away from suffering. Don't turn away from disappointment. Don't turn away from pain. But don't let that take over either. See? It's like, I'm going to go roll around and bleed even more, thinking that's a solution. So I'm talking to some of you here. Your relationship with news these days. Then you feel like, if I don't do that, then I'm enabling. Really? Did someone elect you to go register? Protest? When the votes come, you already voted. The results already came. I'm not saying don't do anything. Different people have different things to do. You are not going to help by, rolling around in blades. these razor blades. Stay away. This is not escapism. This is just why bleed even more? Build up your energy. Build up your defense. Strengthen your immune system, so to say. Not by rolling around in razor blades, infected blades. Don't do that. Put down. Lay aside. Lay aside. And this applies too, right? To if you have resentments, regrets, anger, dissatisfaction. Know that these are results of causes. Then ask yourself, am I ready to set them aside, put them aside? And when I was in Peru, we did a program where I talked briefly about the Buddhist approach to conflict resolution. The Buddhist approach to conflict resolution, I would say, before getting the two people in conflict, and potentially 3, 4, 5, 6, right? But let's just start with 2, right? Before you get the 2 to sit down and try to resolve the conflict, the Buddha's way is to say, you first start with, are you willing and able to put aside the resentment? Before getting into who is right, who is wrong, all of that. Before going into the room, the mediation room, all the way up to, right, these conferences in the third neutral country. First of all, are you willing and able to put aside the resentment? Well, to truly answer the question, you have to ask, is it really that painful? Sometimes it's not painful enough. So sometimes people say, oh, I don't know. My Dharma practice, sometimes I feel, I don't know if it works, Then I said, well, I wish you well, but go ahead and suffer more. I mean, unless, you actually, I'm not wishing ill on you to suffer more. I'm saying, don't be asleep with that suffering. Open your eyes and look, open your hearts and look and feel. That's how suffering stays around. Because it does this thing where it tortures you and then it says, oh, go to sleep. So you have to look. You have to be brave. Look at it. Feel it. When you feel it, you look at it, then you're ready to put it aside. So the first, acknowledge and determine not to act in such ways again. Now, how can you determine not to act in such ways again? And often, right, you read these books and you say, yeah, easier said than done. Right? Please, that expression, X out that, throw that away. What is actually going on when you say that? Have you really asked yourself that question? It's basically saying, I don't want to do anything about it. And has the situation changed? No. So you're basically saying, I want to sulk, I want to stomp my feet and complain about how unfair everything is. By saying, well, easier said than done. That really takes us nowhere, right? So how do you resolve not to act in such ways again? It's related to his second part. He says, secondly, to spread inclinations of goodwill through the whole system and towards anyone else connected to that action. I think Christians call this forgiveness. To forgive. But here we don't use the language of forgiveness because in this system, it's not an issue of, we don't frame the problem in terms of offense and forgiveness, which I would say a God-based system. That's their internal logic. I'm not criticizing the logic. I'm just saying that's not the logic here. Yeah? The logic here is different. The internal logic here is if there is any offense, it's the offense that you inflicted on yourself. And then from there, that spreads to harming others. So here, to radiate, to spread goodwill, which is also called loving kindness, friendliness, to the whole system. So this is what sometimes I say, you have to accept yourself as you are right now. In all its messiness, in all its contradictions, in all its beauty and ugly, you have to accept that. Accept doesn't mean, right, to continue to feed the unskillful, unhealthy parts. It's just saying accept it as what it is now, knowing that what it is now is actually very changeable, can be reconfigured. There's no abiding self. You are not, you didn't fall out of the sky and be the same thing forever. No, right? So you accept that. And then there is a chance of changing what is unhealthy, what is unskillful, what is producing suffering and stress. It can only come when you accept. And in this case, it says, have goodwill towards the whole system and including, now, if this wrong, if this suffering, if this memory involves others, you have to radiate that to them as well. And so it's loving kindness, it's metta that will help us undo this suffering. What needs to be cleared occurs on 3 levels. There are the active programs, actions we keep doing. There are then, that's the first level. Second, there are involuntary tendencies, patterns that lie dormant but come to the surface under stress, or as the mind unfolds in meditation. So 2 places this dormant, all these dormant involuntary tendencies will come up. 1 is when we're under stress. 2 is when you train in formal meditation, then they can come up. But since we do so little of this, the second one, then most of us only encounter these dormant tendencies when we're under stress. And usually when it comes out that way, we get dragged around by that. Mercilessly, we get dragged around by these involuntary tendencies. And then, third, finally, the third that needs to be cleared is self-view. Those delusions that we have claimed as part of who I am, what I am. This is who I am. Don't try to change me. You can say that as a strategy to tell others to mind their own business. But for yourself, know that you can change. Come on. Don't actually believe that this is who I am. I don't need to be changed. I don't need to be improved. As a strategy, sure, you can say to others, because don't have others force you to become this or that. That's also not skillful. Trying to live up to others' expectations, right? Of what they think you should be, what they think you are, and all of that. That's also delusion. Yeah? In all cases, the method entails accessing the patterns and programs in the mind and revealing their tracks with deep attention, and then being mindful of and fully sensing how these conditions manifest. Then we need to meet them skillfully so that a response arises from the intelligence that begins to return through not following the old track. In brief, we establish and firm up a reference to a healthy pattern and then expand awareness so that that bright quality receives, meets, and smooths out residues of fear, rage, self-hatred, grief, or whatever the chitta hasn't been able to discharge. This may sound like a lot, but because many impulses and programs move along a few basic tracks, clearing the past is not a matter of focusing on every wild pig that's charged through the heart. It is more a case of straightening, uprooting, and leaving its tracks. Yeah. Clearing the past is not a matter on focusing on every wild pig that's charged through the heart. Because sometimes we think, so now we need to do clearing, right? Then those of us who are a little neurotic, right? We're gonna start like creating flow charts and, all this, to list out everything that needs to be cleared, No. Yeah? It's like the underlying. At the most obvious level, that of acknowledging actions and of changing how we're going to act in the future, you own up to any unskillful deed you feel you have done, and with deep attention discern the underlying pattern. Remember, it is a pattern, it's not a self. Remember, it's just patterns. Take them seriously enough, but don't give them more power than they have. They don't. They're just patterns. Just enough attention and they can be dissolved. They are just patterns. But patterns are habits, so you have to be persistent. So, you recollect an unskillful deed you have done towards another, considering how you would feel if you were them, or towards the person you may have been at that time. Both, Look back at, also don't say, oh, that's me. Just recognize, oh, that is an earlier version in that moment. Not that also it's not also saying that there is some kind of evolving back then and now. It's just towards that person, you also radiate goodwill. Towards that you, the earlier version of you, or just 2 hours ago on the way here, somebody cut you off, and you went speeding up, to honk your honk, right? Now also consider that you and say, oh, poor you. That must have been so stressful. Yeah? And when you remember being the objects of others' abuse or lack of empathy, you do much the same. You take the impression of who you feel you have been and who you feel the other has been and suffuse the entirety with goodwill, with loving kindness. To who you felt offended you, wronged you, and to who you felt you were being wronged, being abused, radiate loving kindness, radiate metta. The practice covers both ourselves and others because in the heart, self and other are just forms that arise from contact and formation. That's self and other. Perception and formation. Perception is what we solidify into self. Formation is what we solidify into other. So you radiate this towards all. They are interdependent. That is, our personalities are established and molded dependent on who we have customarily interacted with, such as parents, peers, and colleagues. And it is through the eyes of our personality that we regard and define others. When the personality has been embedded mistrust or hostility pattern, it projects that onto others. Granted, many people can exhibit forceful or intimidating mannerisms, but when your buttons get pushed by a few words or a glance, or even just by their status, then you know you have stuff to clear. Otherwise, you keep that track of inferred hostility open and well-trodden. And that is just a big mess. The process of clearing entails our capacities to suffuse or pervade the chitta with healthy ripples and waves. And so, yes, the chitta, is flickering, right? Is shaky. But that's not all bad news. It can be flickering and shaking with heavy, dark, unskillful states. Or you could send it goodwill and loving kindness. And then it will also shake that way. Now it will shimmer. It will radiate. Do that. This entails a soft and slow expansion of awareness through body and heart. It is a meditative training based on understanding that where awareness goes, energy goes. And where energy goes, patterns will form there. When I was in Peru one weekend, we did a program on how to cultivate this goodwill, how to cultivate this loving kindness. And I used a text that was taught by the founder of the lineage that I'm a part of, the Drigong Kagyu lineage. Kyoba Chikden Sumgön, the founder that lived in 12th century Tibet, he has 3 texts. One is hundreds of pages on how to cultivate this metta, this loving kindness. Then there is a middle length, which is just a few pages, and then one that is very brief. The one that is very brief is the hardest to understand. The middle length one, more or less we have translated. So I was teaching that text over the weekend last weekend in Cusco, Peru. And in the course of teaching that, I saw more things that I didn't see the first time, the second time, the third time, the fourth time. I've done that text several times. But it was very inspiring to look at those words again. And now this chapter is basically saying you have to let that be the basis of whatever change you want to affect in you. It has to come from that place. Yeah? So I already have some plans to do a series on that. That how to cultivate loving kindness. What is it when we say loving kindness or goodwill? Here Ajahn Sucitto uses the word goodwill. I think because sometimes, right, again, loving kindness, just like the word karma or love, it's a word everybody uses, but it may or may not be what the Buddha intends us to understand as metta or maitri. So anyway, it's 9:05 now. You have some question that you really need to ask, otherwise you'll stay up all night. Or comment. Yes.
If somebody mistreats us and then we, mentally try to suffuse that situation with loving kindness, is there room to take some sort of action in that situation, like externally?
Oh, yes. So the question is like, if somebody you recognize is mistreating you or you think, right? And that's fine, You say, this person is mistreating me and I'm trying to infuse metta, loving kindness to that person. So then the question is there something as well to do on the external level? Yes. Get out of the way. Yeah, so doing the inner work doesn't mean, right, externally, you become a doormat. If someone is kicking and punching you, get out of the way, right? And then in kind of like Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes you've seen, right, representations of like Buddhas, that are really wrathful. So they say, and if you're really compassionate, if your compassion is really strong, right, you can manifest the appearance of the monster to stop this person from causing harm to him or herself by harming others. So turn into Godzilla and go, right? So that the harm doer will stop. Because when the harm doer harms others, he's also creating a lot of negative karma for himself. But of course, if you don't have the power to control Godzilla after you have conjured Godzilla, then better not do that. Then just get out of the way. Yeah. Yeah. All this inside work that we're talking about here is not a substitute for what outside steps that you have to do, Our first inclination, our first response should not be to hit back or to sue. But sometimes you still have to sue the person. So this is not at all to become a doormat. But don't let it be so automatic. The moment, right? What is it? The moment some insult is felt, the moment some offense is felt, we become so sure that I've been wrong and want to hit back. Practice restraint also, because often it's cloudy. and then the certainty that I'm right. That also we need to work on. But not, so that people will, what's the word? Gaslight, right? Yeah, the expression. Not that so that, you become a walking torch for people to gaslight you, right? Like, wait, was I right in feeling like, outrage, You don't want, to hold up a sign, gaslight me, I'm practicing Buddhism now. But nonetheless, the Buddha says, our instinct is just to immediately react. Pause. Don't get those programs to immediately, get switched on. Yeah, so we will stop here tonight and continue next week. So before we end, take a moment. We call it doing dedication. So here we dedicate this. We think, whatever good we experience here, whatever insights we gain from this, may these insights, may these lessons, may whatever merit that is gained here be dedicated to others finding similar freedom, finding similar meaning in their lives, in however they are going to find this, however they are going to encounter this. So this is not, may everyone come to Urban Dharma or even come to Buddhism, Buddhism, Urban Dharma, all these things are just ways to get to what we call to become awake. So when we dedicate, we're not dedicating to the ways, we're dedicating to people actually finding that freedom from suffering, finding that lasting happiness. So dedicate what we do to that goal. So take a moment to think about that. And I'm going to chant a dedication in Tibetan that speaks to what we call the awakening mind, bodhicitta, which is this mind that is freed and also have the capacity to free others from suffering. Basically, it says, wherever this mind has not arisen yet, has not been awakened yet, may it arise. Where it has arisen, even in a little bit, may it increase, and increase in such a way that it becomes greater and greater and greater. Chanchu Sem Chorim Poche Ma Ge Ba Nam Ge Gyu Che Ge Ba Nyam Ba Me Ba Yang Wo Ne Gong Du Be War Shu. Okay, thank you for coming.